Welcome to the Stewardship Leader Podcast, brought to you by the Christian Stewardship Network. CSN exists to encourage, teach, and connect church and stewardship leaders and help them build and lead healthy stewardship ministries in their church. You can learn more about CSN at christianstewardshipnetwork.com. Welcome to Stewardship Insights, a brief conversation on how to help you be a better stewardship leader. On today's conversation, we're talking about measuring the impact of your ministry program. Peter Drucker said, "You can't manage what you can't measure." And that's very, very true. The question that we need to ask ourselves as stewardship leaders is, how effective are the programs that we're running? It's not just people sitting in seats. We can have great attendance, we can have great entertainment during our classes, but if it's not leading people to life change, something that's actually changing the way they're thinking, changing the way they're stewarding, then really it's a lot of work that does not produce fruit. And our desire is that you would have fruit in the ministry that you're running. So therefore, it's important that you measure your ministry programs.
That's right. You should measure it early and you should measure it often.
Yeah.
This should be something that you're thinking through as soon as you begin to implement a class or a program. Maybe begin to ask some people before the class begins where they're at. We actually had a master student one time come in and measure our entire class prior to the program based on sociology standards that they use for social work programs, and to see how these people that were going to be students in the class, how they were doing. And then again, she measured it on the back end of the 7-week workshop and showed us the results of how effective it was. And that was kind of cool because it was somebody from the outside coming in. They were getting their master's in social work and they were able to measure it. That was really cool to get some questions and understand what we should be looking for. But on the flip side, our team has used SurveyMonkey, where we'll send out surveys after every single class. We'll measure the participation rate. We'll measure how many people finished the program. We'll measure where they dropped off. If they dropped off in a 7-week or a multi-week program, we'll measure the biblical content versus the practical content. If it's a very biblically oriented class, great, it should have more biblical content. But if there needs to be a balance, we need to know, are we hitting the things that people need to know? If we have coaches in a class, we'll then ask the question, how was your coach? Did they talk too much? Did they allow you to ask questions? Did they guide the conversation? Did they open it up and let every single person at the table share?
Right.
We coach our coaches that they're not teachers,
right,
because a lot of the teaching happens from the front.
That's right.
And so the coach is there actually to facilitate conversation, to draw people into conversation and allow others to ask the questions they need to ask. So one of the survey questions is, how did your coach do in that regard? Did they allow you to talk or did they overshare? We want to know what's happening. And these surveys, this ministry measurement, it is so helpful because it lets you know when you should change programs. It lets you know how to communicate to your oversight. Whoever you report to in the church, you can now lay before them testimonies that have been captured in a SurveyMonkey.
Very powerful that way.
You can lay out how effective the program is. And when they're looking at their leadership team and they see that somebody on their team is actually measuring the success of ministry, that's the person that they're going to say, hey, will you help us measure other places? So do realize this is extremely important.
Yeah, I think you have to look at what do you need to measure. And I think there's 4 types of measures, 4 things that you should measure in any program that you're doing. First, as David said, it's the presentation. It's the teacher. Are they doing a good job? Is the content really connecting with the audience? And really, we're talking about anything from the PowerPoint presentation to the handouts or the workbook, whatever it is that you have. Is that communicating effectively? Because if it's not, it doesn't add value. If actually it detracts from the experience and actually gets in the way of the learning process. So it's important that you make sure that the presentation and that the teacher is doing a good job. That's the primary source of information that's coming into their ears and in their hearts. And if that's not done well, it's going to get in the way of the message.
The next thing to measure is relational impact. And that is the person really finding that they're in a community that genuinely cares for them and supports them. This is something that we put into every survey. Did you feel cared for and supported in this program? And I'll tell you, in almost every program, we have 100% yes here. But when we see one person that says, no, I didn't feel cared for and supported, that's a major thing for us as leaders to step in and figure out, okay, what's going on? Is there a volunteer, or was it me as a pastor? Did I do something that rubbed somebody the wrong way?
Yeah.
We want to know that they're feeling cared for, that they're feeling supported, and we build encouragement and prayer into every program. And so we're asking, did you get to experience prayer? Did you feel encouraged? And I can say 99% of the time we get just incredible reviews in this area, but it is awesome to be able to find that one person that didn't feel like they were supported and go serve them. Make sure they're taken care of. And those people will eventually become your best evangelists because they see you really do care.
Right. I mean, you're following up on a complaint they had when most of the time they think nobody's even going to read this. So it's really, really an opportunity to minister and to repair something that you never intended to do, but it happened. The other one is tools. What tools are you using in order to help people practically walk this out?
Right.
In the area of stewardship, you can't just talk about the theology of stewardship. You can't just talk about what the Bible says you should do. You actually have to help people to actually do it. What that means is you have to have some tools, whether they're your own tools or tools that you take from someone else. It really doesn't matter, as long as they're effective. So the way you measure that is you put people through a program that has, let's say, a debt repayment process. And if that's the case, you want to know, did they understand it? Did they use it? Did they have a reaction like, wow, this is awesome? Or is it, I'm confused, I don't know what I'm doing? And if you don't get that feedback, you may think that your Excel spreadsheets are awesome. They may not be.
Right.
So it's really important to get that feedback. It's so crucial to people actually learning and walking away, not just with information, but with application.
That's right. And then the fourth and final place that you've got to measure is spiritual transformation. So you have to leave a question on the end of your survey that says, would you share your testimony with us? Would you share some of the things that you learned? Would you be willing to share what you experienced in this class and get testimonies? This is one of my favorite things, because when I end a program, I will implore the people going through the program and say, hey, the only way we can make this class better for future people going through it is if you'll tell us how it impacted you, where it impacted your life. So I will heavily share this message as I'm teaching it. And then when we send out the surveys, we get a high participation rate that will go through and fill this out. And I'll say, just put a testimony in here. Let us know how this has affected your life. And we see things where people have completely shifted to say, I used to be driven and I used to be chasing, this idea that my identity was in my career. And now I recognize God owns everything and he's a provider. I've started tithing for the first time in my life. Or maybe I used to tithe and I stopped, but I've started again because I understand that God owns everything and I get the opportunity to put him first. Like, you'll see these testimonies that really highlight spiritual transformation. There is a very practical piece of, hey, I've implemented a budget. I've implemented a debt reduction strategy. And that is a part of somebody's spiritual journey.
It's a testimony.
So these testimonies are so fun, and they're fun for you as a leader when you get to read them. And every time we finish a significant program, I will gather all the top stewardship leaders. And we will then read these testimonies and share the wins. We'll celebrate the victories together. We want to celebrate as a team what's happening. But the only way you can celebrate, the only way you can be a strong leader in this area is if you've measured it. If you've sent out surveys, either for free through SurveyMonkey, or you can do paper surveys at the end of a class. Everybody's there. If they've got paper in their hand, they'll usually fill it out. It's just usually not quite as sophisticated, and you end up having to type up the results yourself on the back end. So that's why we landed with SurveyMonkey. We can print it all out and easily read everything, but you decide how you can get the most effective and the most consistent metrics for your programs.
Remember, you cannot manage what you can't measure. So we encourage you to measure your ministry programs, and you will see improvement and you'll see success, and you'll just see people being transformed, and you won't miss the fact that there's actually life change happening. And that's the whole reason this ministry was even started. Well, we want to thank you for joining us for this Stewardship Insight. And if you enjoyed it, share it with someone. We'll see you next time.